Hello, I'm Adrian Finnegan. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and economics. This week, Theresa May hangs on to her chair while her Brexit deal is overwhelmingly rejected by Parliament. Can Britain avoid crashing out of the European Union without a deal? Also this week, currency to buy essential goods is hard to find in Zimbabwe. There's anger after the government doubles fuel prices to curb demand. And snazzy new cars can't hide a trail of gloom for automakers at the Detroit Auto Show as the US-China trade war eats into their profits. It's a confusing paradox that's keeping all sides in the Brexit drama on edge. Britain's Prime Minister Theresa May narrowly survived a no-confidence motion, while her plan to navigate Brexit was massively rejected by Parliament. The deadline of March 29th, 2019 is marching ever closer, and European leaders are warning that the prospect of Britain crashing out of the Union without a deal has increased. This could lead to huge economic disruption on both sides of the Channel. Joining us now from London is James Smith. James is an economist at ING with the Global Markets Research Team. Good to have you with us, James. So, the Prime Minister's deal was voted down in Parliament. Does that mean that Brexit is now more or less likely, or a no-deal scenario is more likely?
Well, for now, the default remains that we're leaving the EU on the 29th of March. But the big question now is, will Theresa May reach across party divides to seek a further consensus on Brexit? Well, for now at least, it seems like Plan B is going to look pretty similar to Plan A. No immediate sign that Theresa May is going to walk back on her red lines, nor that some of the opposition parties, the Labour Party, are going to suddenly shift in direction either. So for the time being, no immediate clarity, but one thing is getting more and more likely. We're running out of time, and in our view, an extension to Article 50 is getting more and more likely.
What message are the financial markets and investors giving us on all of this at the moment? Do they see perhaps a softer Brexit as being more likely, or a no Brexit at all, or a hard Brexit?
Well, I think markets are trying to take the silver lining from things at the moment. The pounds remain pretty calm. And I think investors are looking at two things. I think they think some kind of cross-party agreement is getting more and more likely, as to is an extension of the Article 50 period. So that's the two main themes in the markets at the moment. But importantly, it's going to be a bumpy ride to get there. I don't think any immediate resolution to this is forthcoming, and it could be at least a few more weeks before we get clarity. So I think this calm in markets, it could get a bit bumpier before it gets better.
And I mean, what is the outlook for the British pound, which, I mean, ever since the referendum back in 2016 has been trading, at least 20% lower than it was? I mean, is that ground ever going to be recovered?
Well, we think in the long run it probably will be, although of course that's premised on the idea that we either get a more market-friendly, softer Brexit outcome, or we get a second referendum that would potentially result in Remain. I guess that's at least the base case according to the polls as things stand. So in the long run, prospects for the pound look a bit better. But as I say, for now, it could be several months before we know for sure whether or not no deal has been avoided. Article 50 could be extended. It's going to be a choppy ride for markets before things get better.
And that's not good for business, is it? It's the uncertainty which is bothering the business community at the moment, making everybody very jittery.
Well, exactly. So while the markets can kind of draw a little bit of comfort from this cross-party support idea, for businesses they have to deal in facts. And the cold, hard fact, as things stands, remains that we're leaving the EU with or without a deal on March the 29th. So for businesses, they have to prepare for that, and we're likely to hear businesses get more and more vocal about preparations they're making.
We were talking on last week's programme about the amount of money that's moved out of the UK into the European Union as businesses prepare for Brexit and whatever happens. I mean, even if the UK ends up with a much softer Brexit or even remaining in the EU, as far as that money moving out of the economy is concerned, it's too late, isn't it?
Well, yeah, potentially. I mean, clearly the UK economy has already been hit very hard by the Brexit process. Investment was really sluggish through last year. So, yeah, it may never be fully recovered. But I think should we get a deal or if in the end there's a second referendum and the UK votes to remain, then the prospects should get a little bit better in the short run. But it all really depends what that final Brexit model is. And it could potentially be quite a few years before we get there, because of course we still have this transition period to come if some kind of deal comes in.
OK, James, really good to talk to you on Counting the Cost. Thanks for being with us. China's trade dispute with the United States is taking a toll on its economy. Exports have fallen to their lowest point in 2 years, while imports are also down. Katrina Yu reports now from Beijing.
The world's largest trading country has been trading a little less. According to China's Customs Administration, exports fell by 4.4% in December, while imports were at their lowest level since 2016. Concerns for the year ahead were underlined at a news conference in Beijing.
In 2019, the biggest hidden worry for China's foreign trade is still the complex and grim external environment. Uncertain and unstable factors are still numerous. Protectionism and unilateralism from certain countries are rearing their heads.
A slowdown in global demand and the continuing trade dispute with the United States are being blamed for the current predicament China finds itself in. China and the US are midway through a 90-day truce in the tit-for-tat trade war which started last April. Analysts say China's shrinking trade figures could be used by Washington to increase pressure on Beijing.
I think Beijing clearly knows the pressure that they're under to both restore confidence domestically in their leadership and into restoring investor confidence, not just domestically, but internationally. So I think Beijing clearly knows that, and I think the U.S. knows that that Beijing needs to get a win here, and they will be looking to put pressure on Beijing because of it. Despite
the lower figures, China posted a record surplus in its trade with the United States last year, worth more than $320 billion, the largest in more than a decade. That's a sore point for the US, and according to the Trump administration, a major justification for its trade war with China. But the apparent good news does little to distract from China's cooling economy. December's low trade figures follow a disappointing November when consumer spending also fell, contributing to a gloomy economic start to 2019.
And the trade war has cast its shadow over the North American International Auto Show in Detroit. High-powered sports cars and SUVs took center stage, but car makers say the industry is in turmoil as tariffs push up steel and aluminium prices and eat into profits. Al Jazeera's John Hendren reports.
The most renowned auto show in North America opened with drama, glamour, and muscle cars descending from above. Automakers rolled out buzzworthy new models, including Cadillac's XT6 Utility, Kia's Telluride, and Ford's Shelby Mustang GT500, the fastest street-legal Ford on the road. There were concept cars that might one day hit the road, like the Infiniti QX Inspiration and the Lexus LC Convertible. But the mood among the automakers at the 2019 North American International Auto Show in Detroit is somewhat somber. Global auto sales, which boomed from 2010 to 2016, have slowed. GM is closing plants. Ford is partnering with VW to make its cars in Europe, and sales in China have plummeted amid a U.S. trade war.
Perhaps a contraction in the overall number of vehicles that they sell, but they're shifting their production process toward producing more trucks and less sedans.
And while some automakers brought the drama, there are fewer of them here this year. BMW, Mercedes, Volvo, Porsche, Jaguar, and Land Rover are all skipping the event this year, opting to reveal new models online or at their own events instead. Their exodus has left room for other lights to shine.
And the winner is the Genesis G70.
This may be known as the year when Korean cars really came into their own. Hyundai's Kona won Utility of the Year, and this is the car of the year, the G70 by Genesis. Priced between $30,000 and $50,000, this car competes with entry-level BMWs and Mercedes, showing that Korea is now in the sports car market.
The North American Truck of the Year is the Ram 1500.
As sedan sales slow and U.S. manufacturers retool to make electric and autonomous cars, sport utility and truck sales remain strong, including Fiat Chrysler's massive Ram 1500, the truck of the year.
We're very happy with the performance that we had in 2018. And now with this new pickup truck here, this new heavy duty, we're looking for even better things in 2019.
But amid the celebration in the Motor City, automakers here are fretting over forecasts that consumers will hit the brakes on new car sales in 2019.
With China importing fewer goods, Europe's economic powerhouse Germany is feeling the pinch. Its economic growth slowed in 2018 to the weakest rate in 5 years. GDP grew by 1.5% last year, dropping from 2.2% in 2017. China is Germany's largest trade partner and the source of much of its auto industry's profits. China's slowdown is just one of the foreign risks facing Germany's export-oriented economy. There's the potential messy Brexit, anti-government protests in neighbouring France, and America's protectionist threats. Still to come on Counting the Cost, Venezuela's president raises the minimum wage by 300%. We'll tell you why the additional money, though, won't help people buy any more goods. But first, fuel prices in Zimbabwe have more than doubled, sparking strikes and violent protests. The government says it was the only way to make people buy less fuel as it struggles to tackle a currency crisis. Foreign exchange is now hard to find in a country that scrapped its own currency a decade ago. That's led to long lines for fuel, bread and medicine and has pushed up prices. Paul Chatterjian reports.
Frustration over Zimbabwe's worst economic crisis in a decade ignited riots and prompted a strike by unions. Protesters tried to shut down the capital Harare and the southern city of Bulawayo by erecting barricades and burning tires. Police responded by shooting live rounds, trying to disperse rioters with water cannons and tear gas. The uproar began when Zimbabwe's President Emerson Mnangagwa announced that fuel prices would more than double.
Someone just wakes up and decides to increase the fuel price. We are demanding that the price be reduced to its proper price.
The information minister tweeted, "Clever people know what to do. Avoid fuel guzzlers, cancel unnecessary trips and use bicycles. Do not protest in the streets. You can lose a limb in skirmishes." That unprecedented increase is seen by economists as a way for the government to control an economy that is once again in danger of free fall. Not only is there a shortage of cash and fuel, but 80% of the population is unemployed.
Our careers are dead. Anyone above 18 years of age is staying at home without a job. The government should do something because we voted for them.
Lack of fuel, barricaded roads, and burning tires have prevented people from going to work and school. Protesters are demanding the government meet with opposition leaders to figure out how to end the economy's downward spiral. Others are resorting to looting for overpriced basic goods, and drivers are queuing for hours to try to get fuel at petrol stations that have mostly run dry.
We can't say we are a country when we are paying $5 for public transportation and spending more than 5 days in a fuel queue, and when the president appears on TV not saying anything useful.
Inflation rose to 31% 2 months ago. That's the highest it's been since 2008, when the International Monetary Fund reported it at more than 500 billion%. The president at the time, Robert Mugabe, abandoned the currency, his government adopting the dollar, and the crisis wiped out people's savings and pensions. 10 years on, President Emerson Mnangagwa is touring Russia, Europe, and Asia, hoping to lure investments into his mineral-rich country and avert an economic disaster.
Joining us now from London, Richard Segal. Richard is Senior Emerging Markets Analyst with Manulife Asset Management. Good to have you with us once again, Richard. Why hasn't the government of Zimbabwe been able to get a handle on the economy?
Over the past 10 years, if we analyze conditions, it's actually done much better than it had been doing before. The currency reform stopped the hyperinflation. The economy began to grow, although not that much. The government changed a little more than a year ago. It had a plan to put into action, but it never did this. And rather than finance its budget deficit by effectively cutting costs, namely salaries, it decided to raise taxes. and that was the worst combination because it led to a plummeting of confidence and therefore further economic stagnation.
So Emerson Mnangagwa's government is not tackling this in a way that would satisfy economists like you.
The plan that they have put on paper to some extent will. In some respects, it is fairly comprehensive, and it suggests that the reform elements will turn things around. However, the good parts it hasn't implemented, and the bad parts it has. It won't take that much to turn things around, but it needs the political will for that, and it doesn't have that yet.
Why does it not have the political will, Richard?
It's difficult to say. You can understand that with the change of president towards the end of 2017, there was a lot of optimism then. Some were skeptical. They said they only changed the person at the top, but not the governing apparatus. They then had elections last July. They needed some breathing space. They needed to put together a plan, which they did around October. They started having meetings with the IMF, and the IMF gave a fairly positive response last month. These things take time, but the tendency is to delay and procrastinate and just never get around to it. But I think that goes with the natural lethargy of the old party being in power still. Were there a new party and fresh blood, I think there would be that incentive to move things forward.
Under Robert Mugabe, the economy was shattered by corruption, the botched land reforms, the unemployment rate rose to unsustainable levels. I mean, is any progress being made in all of that? Are there any bright spots here?
I think within the gloom, we have to recognize that there is a lot of evidence of improvement. The economy is, after all, growing again, and before the currency reform, it was declining by 5 to 7% per year. There is a lot of potential in mining and in agriculture. In addition, the telecoms company Liquid Telecom, which is a homegrown company, is one of the most impressive TMT companies across Africa. Although there are many shortages of fuel and especially hard currency, we also have to recognize that this is not necessarily a shortage of hard currency in the economy, just hard currency in circulation. There's a lot of dollar hoarding. Were confidence to return, then those hard currency stocks would quickly flow back into the economy. So I think it really just is a question of confidence and trust in the government.
To what extent is foreign investment going to be a lifeline to Zimbabwe? President Mnangagwa has been on a charm offensive to a number of European countries trying to drum up foreign investments. Who'd put their money into a country like Zimbabwe?
As with any crisis economy such as Zimbabwe, aside from having economic policies which are stable and coherent and has the support of an independent arbiter such as the IMF, the main driver of growth will be generating employment and investment, whether it's domestic, whether it's money which has left the country which will return, or whether it's foreign investors. In order to do that, you need to have something to invest in, which the country does, but you also need to have stable policies and the expectations that they will be stable. However, the types of foreign trips that the president is making, either to Russia, China, or to Davos, aren't going to track the type of longer-term investment that the company needs. It needs to focus on the types of investors that were active in the economy in the 1970s and the 1980s, the ones that had been successful in other emerging markets, as opposed to the types of investors which will buy into opportunities on a very selective basis and also very opportunistically, seeing what they can do and get out of the situation for themselves and maybe the government, as opposed to for the broader economy.
Richard, always good to talk to you on Counting the Cost. Many thanks indeed for being with us.
Thank you.
Over in Latin America, Venezuela is offering a grim reminder of what happened to Zimbabwe in 2008. The International Monetary Fund estimates that its inflation rate will reach 10 million% in 2019. President Nicolas Maduro has increased the minimum wage by 300%, But hyperinflation is expected to swallow up any immediate benefit. Al Jazeera's Theresa May reports now from Caracas, where public health services are crumbling.
The hospital of the University of Caracas was once one of the best, not just in Venezuela, but in Latin America. But matters have deteriorated dramatically in the recent years, as institutions and people deal with the impact of the ongoing economic crisis. Cruz Moreno is 80 years old and fell in the subway. She says she is barely getting any food.
There is nothing here, nothing. Look at what we are being fed. It's cold and I don't want to eat it. But what am I going to do?
Also in the room, there are patients who've suffered heart attacks and strokes, others being treated for gunshot wounds.
Employees from the hospital allowed us to come here to this emergency room to see the situation on the ground. They say that they need medicines, food for the patients that you can see here.
Last weekend, electricity in the hospital went out for several hours. At least 2 patients died during that time. Staff say the toll may be in fact higher.
They said there were 5 and then 7 who died. There are 12 bodies in the morgue and we are trying to find out when they died. We have been telling the government that the generators were broken for months and nobody heard us.
Venezuela's President Nicolás Maduro blamed the blackout on the opposition, describing it as a terrorist act. With infrastructure failing, empty shelves and shortages of even the most basic drugs, President Maduro announced his latest economic recovery plan. He told the country's Constituent Assembly that it was aimed at ending what he's described as an economic war.
The national minimum wage is going to be in half a petro and 18,000 bolivars for the working class.
A 300% increase. He also pledged to distribute food supplies every 15 days and said the country had now enough money to cultivate at least 3 million hectares of crops. But many believe he's being unrealistic.
No matter what you do, 2019 is going to be a year with brutal hyperinflation, and the government's response is primitive because they are afraid of the potential costs of reducing public spending.
In hospitals and on the streets, it's the people of Venezuela who are paying the price of an economic crisis which has left a country virtually bankrupt and unable to help those in desperate need.
Construction will soon begin on China's biggest investment project in Sri Lanka, after a Chinese state-owned company completed reclaiming 269 hectares of land from the sea. The Sri Lankan government says the $1.4 billion port city will be a technological marvel, but critics say that it's part of a crippling debt trap. Manel Fernandez reports from Colombo.
This bare expanse of land reclaimed from the seas around Colombo is where Sri Lanka is building a port city that it hopes will become the financial hub of South Asia. China is helping pay for and build this new project. Its ambassador was on hand to check on progress.
The Colombo Port City project is an important project of the One Belt, One Road initiative in Sri Lanka, which is one of the key countries along the maritime Silk Route. It is also an important project to implement the consensus of China and Sri Lanka, and is an important project for the benefit of Sri Lankan society and its people.
For its part, China will own a little less than half the land for 99 years. Yet the government is confident that the new development will help Sri Lanka's economic prospects.
We are going to be the center of change in the next few years, and Port City will be the catalyst in getting us there.
China's dominance here in Sri Lanka cannot be ignored. This, its latest project, Sri Lanka's largest single foreign direct investment, a project to build a 269-hectare financial city on land reclaimed from the sea. And now China is back again, offering Sri Lanka more million-dollar loans.
The government will likely use that money to pay some of its staggering debt, which stands at around $30 billion. And Chinese loans account for some of that foreign debt. This port in the southern region of Hambantota was built with loans from China, but the government couldn't make its payments and had to give up control of the facility to Beijing for 99 years. China has been criticized for pulling Sri Lanka into what some have called a debt trap, but others see it differently.
Any investor, lender, state, China will go where it sees its opportunities. And if Sri Lanka has been not as stellar as we would like in our homework and our preparedness, we may pay the price.
So as it builds this new port city near Colombo, again with Chinese money, analysts say Sri Lanka's government needs to do better to manage its debts and ensure that it keeps control of mega projects like these.
And that's our show for this week. If you'd like to comment on anything that you've seen, you can get in touch with me directly. I'm at @Finnegan on Twitter. Please use the hashtag AJCTC when you do. Or you can drop us a line. countingthecost@aljazeera.net is our email address. As always, there's plenty more for you online at aljazeera.com/CTC. That takes you straight to our page, and there you'll find individual reports, links, even entire episodes for you to catch up on. But that's it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Adrian Finnegan from the whole team here in Doha. Thanks for being with us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.